A new scenario and ancient prophecies. We live in a world that is constantly changing, and some changes have the power to shake not only nations but also hearts. Donald Trump's recent victory is one of these changes. Many wonder, was this victory already written in ancient prophecies? And if so, what does it mean for us? The Bible, in its sacred texts, invites us to look beyond what our physical eyes can see. In Ecclesiastes, we are reminded that there is a time for everything. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1. Sometimes world politics seems to follow a sequence of events that surpasses human logic, and for many scholars of the scriptures, this may not be a mere coincidence. Trump's victory, like other great events that shape the future of nations, may be intrinsically linked to the times and signs of the last days. In recent years, Trump has sparked heated discussions and divided opinions. For some, he represents a strong leader, a figure of courage and determination. For others, his leadership is synonymous with controversy and uncertainty. But beyond what we think as citizens or spectators, what really matters here is what prophecies can tell us about figures who influence not only a country but the world stage. Biblical prophecies, especially those described in the book of Daniel and in Revelation, speak of kings and rulers, of nations that rise and fall, of wars and times of peace that are fleeting. It is curious to realize that the Bible foresees a succession of leaders who would profoundly affect the earth and the people of God, each with a specific mission in the great divine plan. Does Trump's rise fit into this prophetic framework? Are we heading towards greater events, which may perhaps be a fulfillment of prophecies that precede the time of Christ itself? Donald Trump's victory and prophecy. Are we prepared for what is coming? This is an intriguing and, at the same time, disturbing question for those who are concerned with biblical prophecies and the signs of the times. It is as if each step taken by Trump, especially in relation to the Middle East and Israel, paints a prophetic scenario that few could imagine happening in our days. During his presidency, Trump promoted initiatives that not only changed the political landscape, but also evoked ancient promises, which seem to be illuminated by biblical texts. One of the most significant moments was the historic peace agreement, known as the Abraham Accords, established in 2020, where Israel normalized its relations with some Arab countries, including the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. This pact was received with enthusiasm by some, skepticism by others, and with deep reflection by biblical scholars. According to the book of Daniel and the Apocalypse, in the end times there would be signs of a false peace, a period in which efforts would be made to stabilize the Middle East and Israel's relations with the nations around it. In Daniel 9 verse 27, it is written, "He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week." This verse makes many wonder whether this treaty and other peace movements could be part of this scenario described in Scripture. The connection between Israel and biblical prophecy is profound. Israel is the heart of prophecy, and throughout Scripture we see promises made to this people and their land. During Trump's administration there were significant decisions, such as the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, something that echoes God's words in several biblical passages, which always place Jerusalem as a spiritual and political center, until the end of time. By strengthening Israel on the international scene, Trump created a very direct connection with the biblical promises for this nation, which raises many questions about where this places us in relation to what is to come. For many, the signing of the Abraham Accords felt like a step toward a peace that, despite being expected, seems delicate. In the Bible, we hear warnings about a period of peace and security that would precede difficult times. In 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 3, Paul writes, "Whenever people say, 'peace and security,' then sudden destruction will come upon them." This verse has been cited to warn of an elusive peace, a peace that may not be permanent but merely a prelude to something greater. Trump has brought a new vision for diplomacy in the Middle East, but with this vision, old spiritual questions have also resurfaced. Prophecy tells us that Israel will face challenging times in the end times, and that there will be one last conflict before the definitive reign of peace. Therefore, the question, "Are we prepared for what is coming?" is not just rhetorical, but a reflection on our spiritual preparation for what may happen. Many believe that Trump's victory and his Middle East policy were not mere political strategies, but rather a sequence of events that may align with God's prophetic purposes. These rapid and intense shifts in diplomacy have led many to question, is this peace temporary, and are we really approaching the events described in the last books of the Bible? The pursuit of peace in the Middle East has long been a dream of world leaders, but never before have we seen such a bold effort by a U.S. president to try to stabilize the region. And for those who study prophecy, this effort may be a harbinger of turbulent times that precede true peace, the eternal peace promised by God. To understand the significance of this victory and these actions, we must consider, are we about to witness something great, something that changes the history of humanity? Temporary peace is a reminder of what is yet to come, and this sense that something may be approaching leads us to the final question. Are we ready for this story to unfold? 3. Trump, world leadership and prophetic signs. If Trump's victory raises so many questions, it also forces us to reflect on the role of world leaders in prophecy. Since biblical times, great leaders have been described not only as rulers, but as agents of transformation, often used by God to shape nations, correct course, and in some cases even serve as instruments of judgment or redemption. Donald Trump's victory and prophecy. Are we prepared for what is to come? This question becomes even more urgent when we remember that, in the Bible, there are many warnings about how God uses influential figures to fulfill His will, both to bless and to correct. In the books of Daniel and Revelation, we read about kings and rulers who, by rising and falling, changed the course of history. One of the most intriguing aspects is the role of the strong ruler, the one who comes to defy orders and bring unexpected changes. In Daniel 2 verse 21, we read that God changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. This reminds us that even when things seem out of control, God remains sovereign, directing the course of humanity, even if it is in ways we do not fully understand. But more than observing the impact of Trump's actions on the global scene, the question that we must ask ourselves is, what does this mean for each of us? The Bible always warns us to be ready in constant vigilance. Therefore keep watch, for you do not know the day or the hour. Matthew 25 verse 13. This verse calls us to live with attentive expectation, a state of readiness so that, regardless of what happens in the world around us, we can be spiritually prepared for the challenges that lie ahead. Trump's victory, especially in a scenario where tensions are so intense, offers us a mirror. This reflection invites us to think, are we ready to face a period of transition? The Bible reminds us that times of instability can reveal who we really are and where we are spiritually. The world may witness leaders like Trump at different times and under different circumstances, but ultimately God uses these leaders to accomplish His purpose, and we are called to respond with faith, courage, and discernment. It's easy to view world events with fear or uncertainty, but the Bible also instructs us to seek peace in the midst of tribulation. In John 16 verse 33, Jesus says, "In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." This is not a call to ignore the turmoil around us, but rather to recognize that even in the face of great change and powerful leaders, there is a peace that surpasses all understanding for those who trust in God's promise. Our challenge is to be prepared regardless of what leaders and nations do. Trump's victory, the tensions in the Middle East, and the prophecies that permeate these times are reminders that God's plan is underway. The question remains, are we ready for what is to come? Not just in terms of politics or economics, but in a spiritual sense. Are you ready to stand firm and watchful? We have reached a point where we need to reflect on what all of this means for our lives and our spiritual walk. Donald Trump's victory and prophecy. Are we prepared for what is coming? This question echoes in our hearts and minds, especially when we look at recent events in light of biblical prophecy. But perhaps the most important question is, are we ready for the impact these events will have on our own lives? Have you ever stopped to think that many of the great events described in the Bible began in similar ways, with leaders and prominent figures making decisions that seemed to be merely political, but had a deeper spiritual purpose? In the time of Noah, in the time of Moses, and even in the time of Jesus, leaders and rulers played essential roles, moving history in ways that affected God's plan. Are we in such a time, where global events have a direct connection to what God has revealed in Scripture? Perhaps as we observe the changes in the Middle East, the impact of Israel on the international scene, and the search for peace in an increasingly divided world, it is time to question our own role in this grand plan. The Bible tells us that we will be called to take a stand, to choose between God's ways and the ways of the world. In Matthew 7 verses 13 to 14, Jesus reminds us, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many there are who enter through it." What about you? Are you ready to choose the narrow path, the one that requires faith and courage? Trump's victory may be just one piece of a larger puzzle. But while the world looks to him as a political figure, we are called to look to him as a sign of the times, as someone who may be fulfilling, directly or indirectly, a role within the divine plan. And that is when a fundamental question arises: what are we doing to be prepared? Do our lives, our values, our choices reflect what God expects of us in these uncertain times? The Bible repeatedly exhorts us to watch and be alert. In Matthew 24 verse 42, Jesus says, "Therefore keep watch, for you do not know on what day your Lord will come." This call to watch is not just about waiting for the end times, but about being spiritually prepared at all times. Are we living in such a way that if Jesus were to return today, we would be ready to receive him? Do our lives reflect the love, justice, and mercy that God expects of us? For each of us, this is a personal journey. Perhaps you are listening to this reflection and feeling that it is time to adjust your life, to look at your own choices and evaluate whether they truly reflect God's way. What does it mean for you today to watch and pray? What does it mean to prepare your heart for what is to come? Donald Trump's victory may indeed be a call for all of us. We don't know exactly what the future holds, but we do know that God is in control. We may not have the answers to every question, but we do have the promise that for those who seek God, all things work together for good. But are we willing to truly live out that promise, placing our trust and our lives in his hands? As the world changes and leaders come and go, we need to ask ourselves, are we standing firm on the rock, or are we being blown around by the winds of uncertainty and fear? We live in a time when the world seeks peace, but does that peace come from God, or is it just a temporary illusion? And if it is temporary, are we prepared to face what comes next? Think about it. God calls us to live with purpose, to understand that every choice matters, every action counts. There is no way to know what comes next for the United States, the Middle East, or the world, but the real question is, what comes next for us? How are we responding to God's call in our own lives? Hey guys, if you like this reflection and want to continue exploring deep and thought-provoking topics, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. And, of course, activate the bell to be the first to receive notifications whenever we release new content. Oh, and share your ideas with us. Your comments are very important, because it is through them that we can understand what you think and feel about these topics. So, leave your opinions, questions, and reflections below. We really want to know what you think.